So we're in Luke 14, verse 11 downward. The section I came to today, it was about the prodigal son. And we all have heard this story a billion times, most likely. But no matter what, Christ's words always just resonate. So I'm going to go over this real quick, just with you guys. Maybe it'll resonate with you too. A certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me a portion of the goods that falls to me." So the father divided them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Okay, so whenever I would read this, I used to have certain context, but imagine the context is the son is a Christian. I used to think this parable was about an unbeliever, a non-Christian that comes to Christ. But it's actually not that. It's actually a believer who falls away from Christ and then comes back later. But anyway, so put it in that context. So the younger of them asked, said, "Hey, Father, give me a portion of the goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood. Inside of us, God has placed gifts and talents and treasures. Those are the goods that falls to us. Oftentimes it is the success that we have in these things, walking out in our purpose and our callings. Those are the portion that comes to us. So this son is like, "Father, make me successful in these areas. Father, give me these things that you've promised me, the words that you've spoken to me. I want them now." And the father, being as good as he is, because he loves his children, he does do that. Even though sometimes he knows what the outcome is going to be. Oftentimes there are things that I want now. That God's spoken about my purpose and my calling. And I know if some of these things were given to me now, I'm not ready for them. And I know I'm not ready for them because they haven't happened yet. But I want them so bad sometimes, to the point where I can get frustrated and upset at God for not having these things in this moment right now. And some of these things I've waited for years for God to fulfill. I'm seeing him working in it. And actually on one of them, it's like the two of them, it's like the tail end. I just got to push through, but man, you just get tired sometimes. But anyway, so put it in that context of, "Father, give me the things that you've promised me, that you've promised to me through the word." And put it in that context. "Father, give me the gifts. Father, develop the gifts inside of me that you've given me, the talents." So not many days after, the son begged for this thing. And it's a thing that God was going to give this son anyways, at the right time. The father loving his son, he gave him those things. And it says in verse 13, so not many days after the father gave him these things the son asked for, and the son pleaded for, things that were rightfully his, because that's his inheritance, right? We have an inheritance as well that God has for us, but there's a time for that. There's also biblical precedence that God will give things early because he loves you, because you won't let up in this area, even if it is hurtful, because we're asking him for these things. God treats us like adults, and he will give you these things if you really pursue him on that, even though the timing might not be right. Not many days after he got those things, verse 13, the younger son gathered everything that he had gotten together and then journeyed off to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living, or loose living, or ungodly living, right? So that would be the equivalent of, let's say, your gifts and talents is business. God, make me successful in this area. You promised me, make me successful. God grants you that success, even though that was part of your inheritance already, but he's given it to you a little earlier, just because you're his son and he's treating you maturely, because pretty much that's what you were asking for. Treat me like an adult, because you don't let up. Well, it says that not many days after, let's say you got that stuff, success in that business, you started living any way you wanted to, gratifying the flesh, right? Using the things that God gave you to live a selfish, sinful lifestyle, right? This can apply to any kind of purpose because God's got a purpose for every single person. It could be music, musicians. It could literally be this, what I'm doing right here with social media. It could be marriage, a promise that God gave you already, but you're trying to make it happen too early. Verse 14, but when he had spent it all on sinful living, selfish living, there arose a severe famine in the land and he began to want. I love this verse right here because it shows that after you gratify the flesh, you find yourself wanting more. You also find yourself spiritually starved. You're trying to satisfy something that God himself only can satisfy. You're trying to satisfy God's place in your heart with things. And oftentimes it's things that God gave you. So your God becomes the things that God gave you to satisfy that hole in your heart instead of the giver. People think that everything will change when God gives you these things for the better. But that's not the case. Take King Solomon, for example. He's a perfect example. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, this is a guy who was blessed by God with wisdom, with riches, with wealth and fame. God blessed him with those things. And he used those things to satisfy his own flesh. And at the end of Ecclesiastes, he says, all this is pointless. He's not even enjoying life like he thought he would. And he says it's all empty, it's all vanity. It's actually one of the most depressing books to read in the Bible if you're looking at it from that context. But I love the last couple of verses because Solomon says that after doing all of those things, after being miserable, chasing things to satisfy yourself, even with the things that God gave you, satisfying yourself, it's all stupid, it's all pointless, it's all empty, and he says there's no point to life. This is how Christians become suicidal. Like literally, if you're wondering how a minister or somebody that's a pastor or somebody that's on fire for God has suicidal episodes and things like that, it's because they're trying to satisfy God's place in their heart with the things that God gave them instead of God. I've seen that all, I've experienced this myself. That's how I know that. It says that after he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, spiritual famine, and he began to want. Verse 15, then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. Okay, there's a lot of symbolism in this section right here. Join himself to a citizen in that country. Here's the thing, we're naturally designed to serve in some capacity. And we will use these gifts and talents that God gave us to serve either God's plans and ambitions or our own, and ultimately other people's. If we're designed to sing worship music to God and play instruments, but we're not doing it for God, guess who we're gonna do it for? Instead of joining ourselves with God, we're gonna go to a worldly music label and then do it their way. That's an example. If it's business, instead of creating a business for God's kingdom, God's way, you're using those same talents to create a business or to serve another person with your business talents to make money for yourself in that capacity. And this can go in many different ways. So it says that he joined himself with a citizen of that country, the world, essentially. Not God's kingdom, but the world's kingdom. And the person he joined himself to, it says, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. So swine in the Bible actually represents Gentiles or unbelievers, sinful, the filthy, right? It's not an insult to these people. It's just showing that pigs are all about gratifying themselves and getting fat, right? And they're also about rolling around in their own filth, so their own feces. So it's saying when the citizen, the world, non-believers, sent him to feed and to take care of in a worldly way and gratify the fleshly, sinful person. Look what verse 16 says. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. When I got the context of this as being an unbeliever that falls away and uses his own talents and gifts and blessings that God gave him to serve his selfish needs and to serve the world, it changed everything for me. This is Satan's kingdom just demonstrated perfectly. He will send you, Satan will send you to use your gifts and your talents to serve his own ambitions and not give any fulfillment back to you. Jesus said, my food is to do the will of the Father, to serve God, right? That's the food that comes. Well, this is saying that when you serve Satan and you serve the world and you serve your own selfish ambitions, you don't get satisfied back. He would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. That's where the famine comes from. That's the spiritual famine. And the longer you're in this cycle, the deeper in this hunger you get. And the more you try to fill it, if you don't run to God with things that will only make this hole in your heart bigger. Verse 17, the turnaround. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? Whoa, I was satisfied. I was fulfilled where I was at. What am I doing over here? All they're doing is just taking from me. All they're doing is sucking me dry, and I'm not getting filled back up. See, the thing about living in this world, right? You get sucked dry by the world and never filled back up. But with God, you're in the world, but when you're doing it with God, he's filling you back up. And that's why he pours down into you and you're able to pour back out. And it's every day you get filled up and then you pour back out to the people around you. Because no matter what, just living life, you're gonna get drained spiritually. That's why you need a constant fill up. Satan doesn't give you that. That's why people can have everything they ever wanted, their dreams fulfilled, and then end up committing suicide. And it makes no sense. You're like, that's a most famous actor or musician or singer who's got hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and then they're just ending their life. They're saying there's no point to this. This is stupid. That's the reason why. They're getting sucked dry spiritually, and nobody is filling it back up. And the only one that can is Jesus. He is the bread of life. So it says here that verse 17, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? It takes you stepping out of yourself and viewing this situation that you're in to finally have a sober mind about it all. It says, but when he came to himself, he had this realization. We have to ask ourselves, am I living the kind of life I should be living? Or is my head buried in the sand? Or is it with the pigs? Have you actually come to yourself and realized that true satisfaction only comes from God? And he said this, I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. There's a repentance process. The Bible says that those that humble themselves will be lifted up, and that God gives grace to the humble. What is grace? The Bible said it is the power of God to salvation. Humility comes first, grace is given to the humble, and grace is the power to save. That's what we see laid out here. Somebody that fell off was now coming back. He says, I'm not worthy to be your son. Make me just like one of your hired servants. Because even one of God's hired servants, rather than the son, he's saying that even one of God's servants does better than anyone else outside of God's kingdom. We're, of course, God's children who choose to serve God and become his servants. As his children, we get to serve with God. But he's saying, like, I will take just being the servant. I don't even need to be the son anymore. As long as I can be in your house, as long as I can get that fulfillment that only comes from being in the Father's house. It says, verse 20, and he arose and he came to his father. Change of mind, repenting and humbling yourself, and then going to the Father. That's a process. But when the prodigal son was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Oftentimes, The reason why we have such a big issue coming back to God is Satan convinces us that God is not as loving or as merciful or as caring as he actually is. Satan wants to hit us with so much guilt and shame that it keeps us from coming back to God. And this right here is God's way of telling us that not only is he there watching the whole time, ready for this, but he'll run to us as soon as we start making that change. He'll run to us. He fell on his neck and he kissed him. That's making me tear up right now. Showing a fatherly affection for a child. The father ran to the son. Back in those days, the men of status, kings, princes, rich people, which of course this father would be that, and above all those, they didn't run. It was actually undignified for a man of status to run. So when it says here that the father not only saw him, but he ran to meet him a long way, he ran a long way. That just shows how much the father loves us, that he's willing to look undignified in order to show us his love. He's willing to lower himself. That's what that means. God will lower himself to you to bring you back to him because he loves you. So I just encourage you, whoever's listening, whatever area in your life you're running from God, just takes a change of mind. Just be aware of where you're at and just come back to him so you can come back to the Father. And as soon as you make that shift, as soon as you make that first step forward, it says here that he will run to you and he will kiss you and he will love on you and he'll restore you. Verse 22, it says, but the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring a fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. The Bible talks about that the shame of sin is equivalent spiritually to nakedness. That's why Adam and Eve, they try to cover their nakedness in the garden with fig leaves. They try to cover up an internal shame that they felt, internal nakedness, because their robe of righteousness was gone. If you look at the book of Revelation, it says that God gave the saints white robes, which represented the righteousness of the saints. When the Father is giving his son the best robe, it says the best robe, bring out the best robe and put it on him. The best robe is that righteousness. It is that purity. That's what God offers when you come back to him, to cover up that shame. That doesn't come from God, that comes from Satan, to keep you from coming to God. So God said, bring out the best robe or righteousness and clothe him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. The ring, biblically speaking, represents authority. As a son or daughter of God, you have authority in God's kingdom. This authority is the authority that helps you fight back against oppression, anxiety, anger, lust, all those things. The power to do that comes from God. He puts that authority on your finger. And they put sandals on his feet. So in the Bible, in Ephesians, sandals are representative of the preparation of the gospel of peace. So it's a direction. Sandals are what go on your feet, and your feet are what take you places. This is the calling, the purpose, and direction. When you come back to God, he gives you back your direction. He equips you to send you to where you need to go. So it's amazing. He clothes you back up with righteousness, gives you the authority to fight back against the enemy in these areas that hold us bondage, that cause chaos in our mind and in our life. And then he gives you a purpose and direction for your life. And then, verse 23, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. And they began to be merry and celebrate. There's a verse earlier in this chapter, Luke 15:7, it says, I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. Verse 10, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. There is literally a party in heaven over your decision to come back to God. There are actually people that died that are in heaven right now, as well as angels that are celebrating, that are watching and cheering you on. And it says that as soon as you make that decision, there's a celebration, because they know the new direction that you're about to take, with the direction that God's going to give you, the authority he's going to give you, the righteousness he's going to give you. It's going to make Satan's kingdom tremble, and it's going to change the world and change people's lives. They celebrate that you're making the first step to this new life. Or if you're a prodigal, that you're coming back to this life. My encouragement is that, for myself, I have areas in my life that I have to come back to God in. I have areas I need to include God more in. I have areas I need to exercise the authority God's given me in. So if you're that person, yeah, God's right there. Like I said, Satan drains you, the world drains you, serving yourself drains you. But when you come to God in God's presence and to service God, he fills you back up. Do this every morning. Get filled back up. It'll change your mind. It'll change your process of thinking. It'll change your life. And this is how you do it.